Two people have been building a case for you, and you've only caught the edges of it. Maybe it was your sister's phone tilted away from you a half second too fast, screen going dark like she'd practiced that motion. Maybe it was your dad starting a sentence, "Well, if it goes through, we could," and then stopping cold, like he'd said too much, covering it with, "Never mind, forget I said anything," and reaching for his coffee like his hands needed something to do. You noticed. You've been noticing all week, in the small ways nobody teaches you to name: a text that got answered slower than usual, a conversation that changed direction the second you walked into the doorway, a look passed between the two of them that lasted just a beat too long to be nothing. Here's what I want to say plainly, because that's the only way I know how to say anything. You're not making this up. Something happened. And it's not the version you've been telling yourself in the quiet moments when you're supposed to be doing something else. Driving, falling asleep, standing in line somewhere, with nothing to distract you from it. You've spent the last few days running the worst version of this in your head. That they're worried about you. That something's wrong with you, and nobody wants to say it to your face. That you did something, and now people are managing you, instead of talking to you the way they used to. I'm not here to dress that up or explain it away. That's not what this is, and you deserve to hear that early, not buried at the end. This message is reaching you now because the timing actually matters, and I don't say that lightly. Look up this week and you'll find the moon sitting close to the Pleiades, that small, tight cluster of stars people have used for thousands of years to mark exactly this kind of moment, when something is gathering quietly, still forming, not yet ready to be looked at directly. Sailors used to watch for that cluster to know when it was safe to set out. Farmers used to time their planting by it. It has always meant the same thing across every culture that tracked it. Something is being prepared, and its arrival isn't random. The stars aren't why this is happening to you by coincidence. They're why this particular week is the one where it finally starts to become visible. So let's deal with this directly, because you've waited long enough for someone to just say it. Two people had a real conversation about you, recently, more than once probably, and they weren't managing you. I'm not going to make you sit through this whole message wondering if that's true. It's true. Right now, before anything else. What I want to walk you through is what that conversation was actually about, why it's been kept from you this long, and what changes the moment you stop assuming the worst version of it. You know the moment I'm talking about. You've replayed it more than once already, maybe more than you'd admit out loud. Let's look at it honestly. Here's what that almost slip actually meant, because you've been reading it wrong for days now. You've turned it over so many times it's worn smooth in your mind, replayed the tone of his voice, the exact angle of her phone, until the details have started to blur into something worse than what actually happened. And somehow, every single time you run it back, you land on the version where you're the problem. That's not an accident, and it's not a flaw in your character either. When someone catches themselves mid-sentence around you, your brain doesn't default to, "Maybe it's good news." It defaults to threat. That's an old habit, older than this week, older than these two people. It's the same wiring that made your ancestors survive, by assuming danger first and sorting out the details later. It kept people alive for a long time. It's just not built to tell the difference between a real threat and a half-finished sentence from someone who loves you. Here's the reframe, and I want it plain, not softened. The fact that this hit you this hard means these two people actually matter to you more than you maybe stopped to notice lately. You don't lose sleep over a stranger's phone tilting away. You don't replay a half sentence from someone whose opinion carries no weight in your life. The intensity of your reaction isn't proof that something's wrong. It's proof of exactly the opposite. proof of how much room your dad and your sister take up in your life, whether you've said that to either of them recently or not. Sit with that for a second before we go further, because it changes the entire shape of what comes next. Now let's name the actual friction, because I won't leave that part vague the way your own mind has been leaving it vague all week. They weren't talking about you because they were worried you'd done something wrong. They were talking about you because they've been working something on your behalf, quietly, in the background of your regular days, and they didn't want you to know about it until it was real enough to survive being said out loud. Not a hard conversation they were rehearsing to break bad news gently. A case they were building. A recommendation made on your behalf to someone who could actually do something with it. A favor called in from someone who owed one. A door pushed open somewhere you couldn't see it happening, because it was still just a possibility, and neither of them wanted to hand you the shape of a hope that might not hold. Your dad's almost slip, if it goes through, wasn't a warning sign. It was him nearly telling you about something he's been quietly trying to make happen, and catching himself mid-sentence because he didn't want to promise you something that wasn't confirmed yet. He's not a man who likes handing people hope and then having to take it back. You know that about him. This is exactly the kind of thing he'd rather carry alone until it's solid than risk getting your hopes up over nothing. Your sister's phone turning away wasn't secrecy aimed at you, either. It was a text thread with someone else entirely, someone who might be able to help with whatever this is, where the two of them were working out the details of exactly this: timing, wording, who should say what and when, before either of them brought any of it anywhere near your door. You've done this yourself, if you think about it honestly, instead of only through the lens of the last few anxious days. You've kept a plan quiet until it was solid enough to survive being said out loud. A surprise you didn't want to ruin. An application you didn't want to jinx by talking about it too soon. A favor you were still working out how to ask for without sounding presumptuous. That's not scheming, and it never was. That's just what people do when something matters enough that they're scared of getting your hopes up and then watching them fall. This is where the timing stops being a coincidence and starts being something worth paying attention to. The universe doesn't hand you a glimpse of something before the people building it are far enough along for it to hold real weight. If you'd caught the full sentence 2 days ago, if your dad had just kept talking instead of stopping himself, you'd have gotten a plan that wasn't ready yet, half-formed, easy to worry apart before it had a chance to become anything. You would have built a worse story out of less information than you actually have right now. The gap between what you sensed in that kitchen and what you actually knew wasn't neglect on their part. It was the space where something being built specifically for you was still getting solid enough to say to your face without it falling apart in the saying. So here's what's actually been happening this week, whether you've had the words for it or not. You've checked your phone more than once today alone, telling yourself you're just being normal about it, even though some part of you knows you're checking for something specific. You reread your dad's half-sentence in your head at least a dozen times, looking for a version of it that explained the pause as something bad, and you kept coming up empty, because there was nothing bad there to find, just a man trying not to promise too much too soon. Somewhere in the middle of all that, you caught yourself quietly rehearsing 2 different conversations, one where you find out what this is, and one where you never do, and just have to live with not knowing. None of that is paranoia, and I want you to actually hear that instead of just letting it pass by. That's what it looks like to sense something real before you have the shape of it yet. An accurate read on a situation, arriving before the facts have caught up to it. Here's the shape of it, as plainly as I can hand it to you. Whatever they were building toward, it wasn't a complaint about you, and it was never going to be. Complaints get said fast, out loud, in the moment, without any planning behind them. Nobody rehearses a complaint carefully with a second person first. What gets protected instead? What gets worked on quietly behind a few careful text threads and one almost slip over coffee is almost always something someone is trying to hand you fully formed. Something they want to arrive intact in your hands, not fall apart halfway through the telling. That's the piece that changes everything about this week, if you actually let it land instead of bracing against it out of habit. Secrets like this one don't hold for long, and it's not because someone slips by accident and says the wrong thing at the wrong dinner. It's because carrying something unsaid gets heavier the longer it sits, and it gets heavier for the people carrying it, not just for you waiting on the outside of it. Your dad has to sit across the table from you and steer around a subject every single time you talk. Your sister has to angle her phone away every time a message comes in, which is its own kind of exhausting, keeping a hand near a door that isn't supposed to open yet. At some point soon, sooner than the pace of this week has trained you to expect, the discomfort of holding it back is going to outweigh the discomfort of just handing it to you. That's not hope talking. That's just how this plays out, every time. When two people are working on something for someone they love, the tension doesn't dissolve on its own. It builds until it has to become a conversation, and you're closer to that point than you think. So you're going to get the real version. Maybe it comes from your dad, sitting you down deliberately because he's finally sure enough of the outcome to risk saying it out loud. Maybe it slips out sideways from your sister, mid-sentence, the same way the almost slip happened to your dad. That's usually how it goes. The truth arrives a little clumsily, not in a perfectly rehearsed speech. However it comes, notice how different it feels from what your fear built this week. Fear built a version where you're being managed, monitored, protected from something wrong with you. The real version is going to feel like being handed something carefully, because that's exactly what it is. Here's your permission, and I want to say it plainly instead of wrapping it in anything soft. You're allowed to stop bracing. You're allowed to put the phone down tonight without checking it one more time before you fall asleep. You're allowed to sit across from your dad at dinner without scanning his face for the next almost slip. You're allowed to stop rehearsing a defense for a conversation that was never, not once, going to be an accusation. If you want a small, concrete way to actually do that, instead of just hearing it and staying tense anyway, here's one. The next time you catch yourself replaying that pause, the coffee cup, the never mind, forget I said anything, the phone turning away, name it out loud, once, plainly. That was them building something for me, not against me. Say it the way you'd say any true, ordinary fact. It sounds small. It works precisely because it interrupts the loop instead of trying to out-argue it. I want to bring you back to that kitchen one more time. The coffee cup he reached for when he stopped mid-sentence. The phone turning face down on the counter. Picture it again, but let it be what it actually was, not what fear rewrote it into. Two people who love you, quietly working something into place because you are worth doing that carefully for. Not a closed door, not a warning sign. The sound of people caring enough to get it right before they ever brought it anywhere near you. Look up again before this week is over. The moon and that small cluster of stars will have moved on by then, already shifting toward whatever comes next. The same way this will. You don't have to wait for the reveal feeling like a threat anymore. You can wait for it feeling like what it actually is, someone about to hand you something they've been carefully, quietly building, specifically for you, for a while now. If you want something to hold on to in the meantime, the Divine Timing Journal is built for exactly this kind of waiting. A place to write down what you noticed before you had the full picture, so you can look back later and see how often your fear and the truth didn't actually match. You'll find it linked below. If this one landed the way I meant it to, type "almost slip" in the comments so I know it reached the right person. If you want more of these when you need them, go ahead and subscribe.